Nothing. I've been trying to get up here all day for your gay brothers and your gay sisters in jail that write me every motherfucking week and ask for your help. And you all don't do a goddamn thing for them. Have you ever been beaten up and raped in jail? Now think about it. They've been beaten up and raped after they haven't spent much of their money in jail to get their silicone and tried to get their sex change. The women have tried to fight for their sex changes or to become women of the women's liberation. And they write STAR, not the women's group. They do not write women. They do not write men. They write STAR because we're trying to do something for them. I have been to jail. I have been raped and beaten many times by men, heterosexual men that do not belong in the homosexual shelter. But do you do anything for them? No. You all tell me to go and hide my tail between my legs. I will not longer put up with this shit. I have been beaten. I have had my nose broken. I have been thrown in jail. I have lost my job. I have lost my apartment for gay liberation. And you all treat me this way? What the fuck's wrong with you all? Think about that. I do not believe in a revolution, but you all do. I believe in the gay power. I believe in us getting our rights, or else I would not be out there fighting for our rights. That's all I wanted to say to your people. If you all want to know about the people that are in jail, and do not forget Bambi Lamore and Dora Marks, Kenny Messner, and other gay people that are in jail, come and see the people at Star House on 12th Street, on 640 East 12th Street, between B and C, apartment 14. The people that are trying to do something for all of us, and not men and women that belong to a white middle class, white club. And that's what you all belong to. Revolution now! Give me a G! Give me an A! Give me a Y! Give me a P! Give me an O! Give me a W! Give me an E! Give me an R! Gay power! Louder gay power!
Female community. So obviously a winner hasn't been announced yet, unfortunately. Right? I'm not going to pull a Trump and declare victory. So I'm going to read both of my speeches, starting with if Trump unfortunately wins. I am a woman, and Trump wants to take my right to abortion and birth control away. Trump wants to take away the right to my own body as a woman. I am queer, and Trump wants to take my right to love and marry whoever I choose away. Trump wants to take away my right to adopt and seek federal help as a queer person. Trump wants my black and brown trans sisters to keep being attacked and murdered. I am Chicana, and Trump wants to send me and my people back to where we came from. Trump wants to take my dreamer peers' chance to seek education and amnesty away. Trump wants to send my people back to places of poverty and war. I am a minority, and Trump wants to take my rights away. I am a minority, and I will not let Trump take my rights away. We are minorities, and we will not let Trump take our rights away. We are here right now, united and fighting. Together we are the majority fighting white supremacy and racist, trans, homophobic, xenophobic America. Thank you. And now is my speech. If Biden wins, which is what we are hoping for. This was my first year voting. The last election, I was just like the rest of the youth, fighting for awareness, fighting for our families, and voting age peers to make the right vote. The youth was heard this election. The youth have made a huge difference and will continue to be a voice of reason as we deal with the coming victories and struggles. This will be a celebration, hopefully, but it's still a moment to reflect on the 6-3 conservative majority in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is currently deciding if LGBTQ+ people, individuals, couples can adopt. Fulton versus the City of Philadelphia is happening right now, and the damage the Supreme Court plans to do on women, the queer community, and people of color are reasons to keep fighting. Saturday, November 21st, CSO Youth is holding a protest against BRRET, the 6-3 conservative majority agenda. We'll be meeting at Grand Park at 2 p.m. and more information and a flyer are posted on our Instagram, CSO Youth. The fight hasn't ended yet. I also want to address the youth out there. Not in the way you hope. You guys are standing there, smoking, skateboarding, which is fine, but recognize your privilege as a white, cis, hetero men. Many of the kids out here that were taken, their lives were taken, doing things that you guys are doing right now. Address that, acknowledge your privilege. I'm a youth calling out the youth. So thank you. Do something with your privilege.
I love you. You're such a bad.
She also came all the way up here from Florida. She's a public school teacher in South Florida and longtime activist in the Florida anti-war movement. She co-founded Students for Justice in Palestine at the University of Florida, Power in South Africa, and serves proudly on the UNAC Administrative Committee. Cassie is also a member of the Freedom Road Socialist organization. Please join me in welcoming Cassia. All right, everybody. I need to ask you something. If you're standing in front of me, turn to your left. If you're standing behind me, turn to your right. Face that building right over there. And I need you to chant with me. 1, 2, 3, 4. We won't fight a rich man's war. 1, 2, 3, 4. We won't fight a rich man's war. 1, 2, 3, 4. We won't fight a rich man's war. 1, 2, 3, 4. We won't fight a rich man's war. 1, 2, 3, 4. We won't fight a rich man's war. 1, 2, 3, 4. We won't fight a rich man's war. All right, y'all. It's an honor to be here today alongside you in solidarity with the anti-imperialist people of the world, especially the people of Venezuela. Living in the United States, it's our duty to oppose these deadly wars, these deadly sanctions, these interventions that have killed millions of people throughout the world. We must resist the policies of imperialism and allow the people of the world to determine their own fate. It is our responsibility to do this. The last time I was in Washington, D.C. for a national protest, I was 17 years old. It was 2007, and we were at a march marking the 4-year anniversary of the U.S.-led NATO war against the people of Iraq. I saw hundreds of Iraq vets against the war do a die-in in civil disobedience. I saw 30 to 50,000 people take over the streets of D.C. And I thought to myself, this is it. This is what we need to do. We need to continue. If we just have more people in the streets, if we have more people protesting and rallying, that in and of itself will end the wars. But I was 17 and a little bit mistaken, because that's only half of our job. Half of our job here is to continue building these anti-war, anti-imperialist movements. But the other half, while these marches and protests are imperative in raising the consciousness of the people and making the issues of war imperialism central to the politics of this country, we need to do something else. These marches won't end the wars alone, because we live in a country run by the 1%. Whose interests are placed above those of the people always. And being an imperialist country means colonial exploitation of people in places outside of our borders to bring in more profit for the people on top. And organized despite whichever party holds power. Whatever person inhabits that house over there, whether he's a bumbling idiot from Texas, a smart, cool guy from Chicago, or a misogynistic, racist billionaire, it doesn't matter. It's the imperialist agenda that's followed. And I'm sad to say that for every year of my millennial life, the United States has been bombing, invading, sanctioning, and intervening in, destroying countries and people the world over. Hell, as we speak, little Marco, war crimes Abram, and Mr. Troika of tyranny Bolton himself are cooking up new ways to wreak havoc on the people of Venezuela. For months, they've tried fake humanitarian aid interventions, poorly orchestrated opposition rallies, fake interim presidents, and fabricating a hunger crisis. They've imposed harsh sanctions and readied the troops. So what's it going to take to end these decades of wars? Aside from building the movements against imperialism, we have to continue to build up the workers' movements, the Chicano and Black liberation movements, the women's liberation movement, the queer movement, and it needs to be us, we the people who hold the power in the United States. Because the working class has nothing to gain from military exploitation abroad. Only the 1% does. And that's exactly what the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela is all about. The working poor of Venezuela took control of their country in 2002, and ever since the United States has been trying to punish them for it. So it's imperative that we express our solidarity with the people of Venezuela, because the Bolivarian Revolution is a revolution in which the workers hold the power, and that's what we need to do here if we want to end the wars of conquest abroad. And that scares the crap out of them over there. So friends, join us as we march, and please repeat after me, hands off Venezuela!
Hands off Venezuela!
No more NATO!
No more NATO!
And no more war!
And no more war!
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 Thank you, solidarity!
But we're here today specifically to get justice for these three people murdered by the same officer. Joseph Mensa, Antonio Gonzalez, Alvin Cole, and Jay Anderson. If he didn't have his badge, he would have been named a serial killer. But because of his title, he gets to do whatever he wants, unchecked by the law. Police think they're above the law, but we're here to change that. Electeds in Milwaukee want to do it right, they need to indict, convict, and arrest Joseph Mensa. But we know that the system that they operate in is corrupt, so that's why we have another demand. We want CPAC, or Community Control of the Police. CPAC stands for Civilian Police Accountability Council. So in comparison to the Fire and Police Commission, where the police police themselves, CPAC would be citizens, community members, your family members, your friends, having the ability to put cops in jail. For a long time, the law has thought they're above the community, that they don't operate as members of the community, but they do. They live in our neighborhoods, they go to our schools, they go to our churches. Why aren't we their equals? What makes them so different from us? So that's why we need CPAC, Community Control of the Police. Alright? What do we want?
Justice!
What do we want?
Justice!
CPAC. Alright, let's try it again. What do we want?
CPAC!
What do we want?
CPAC!
What do we want?
CPAC!
Okay, hello everybody.
Good afternoon. Hope you all enjoyed those awesome speeches. I want to welcome everybody. Come on in to the International Women's Day 2021 program from the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. So my name is Sid Loving. I'm co-chair of the Dallas Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, coming at you live from Dallas, Texas. And I'm going to be moderating this program today. So we're here with Tracy, Sol, Liz, and Shireen, 4 organizers from all over the country who are going to share perspectives on their work in the labor movement, climate justice and anti-war, fight against police crimes, Chicano liberation movement. It's going to be great. So it's also really appropriate to be here with some of these veteran activists and leaders from our connected struggles for liberation on this day, because the roots of this holiday a century ago are in the fight for socialism and the decisive role of women in these movements. So keeping that history in mind, which we will hear more about in a minute, it's awesome to be here with some of these activists on the front lines, because as we know, the fight's not over, it continues today. And International Women's Day is an opportunity to take stock of where we are, identify the challenges and keep building out the struggles and the connections across them to move forward together. So again, I want to welcome everybody to our live stream. There's going to be links down below in the chat where you can see more, plug into the local work of the organizations represented here today. So be sure to check out that information as well. And after each of our speakers share some perspectives on their work, we're going to have a good old-fashioned Q&A section just to dig into some of the relevant questions. So without further ado, let's get into the program. And the first speaker of the day will be Tracy. So Tracy has been active in organizing for nearly 20 years and is currently part of the Climate Justice Committee and the Anti-War Committee. She's a proud public member of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization and located in the Twin Cities, Minnesota. So Tracy, she's a proud public member of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization.
Thank you so much, Sid.
And located in the Twin Cities,
greeting friends
Minnesota.
and comrades, and happy International Women's Day. I'm really honored to be with you, all of you today. This last year has been a wild ride for many, like myself. A year ago now is right when COVID started to hit us directly, with lockdowns and all types of different mandates around the country. In fact, for me, Women's Day was actually the last event I attended indoors in person in the Twin Cities. It's also included some of the fiercest fights that I've seen in my 20 years of organizing, with a police precinct going up in flames in Minneapolis, protests in the streets of Portland that lasted 100 days, where activists clashed with right-wing agents and with cops and federal agents, and massive military protests around the country. We've all endured a maddening election as a crowded field of Democratic candidates dwindled down to one rich old white guy versus another rich old white guy. And I don't know about you, that feels like forever ago, but we watched these debates happen where these candidates were in plastic cages, and we listened to terrible disinformation that then gave way to outright lies about a stolen election. Now, Biden is the president, and he is, just objectively, he's better for the people of the United States. On a basic level, he believes in science and the science around the pandemic. He believes in climate change, and he's done a few things around that. He's opened up immigration and stopped the building of Trump's border wall. But that's not enough. He's not our candidate. He's still a rich white guy who is advancing U.S. imperialism around the globe, seen last week in his dropping of bombs on Syria. And he's already given up on, we're still waiting for our $2,000 checks, which are now apparently $1,400, maybe. We'll see what happens there. But this last year, women, transgender, and gender nonconforming folks, especially those of oppressed nationality, have been at the forefront of fighting back against attacks and building movements, including the massive protests I talked about before. On the other hand, oppressed nationality communities have been disproportionately affected by the economic crisis and the pandemic that's happening. But what does all this mean for Women's Day in 2021? I want to start by quoting the Freedom Road Unity Statement. The oppression of women predates capitalism. capitalism together with male supremacy intensified the subordination and degradation of women. Capitalism also manipulated family life and sexuality to ensure its control over the working class. So capitalism, the current political and economic system we live under, boils everything down to profit. So the wages that we see are just a fraction of what profit is made, of the wealth that we are earning every day. For women, our wages are less than that of our male counterparts. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the first quarter of 2020, white women earned 79.7% as much as our male counterparts. And those numbers are worse for Black women, who earned 75.1% of the median income and 69.6% for Latina women. And now we're in the worst economy since 2008. And the job numbers are worse than they've been since the 1920s, since the Great Depression, with women facing the brunt of job losses. Many of the jobs lost are in the travel and leisure industry, where women make up 53.1% of the workforce, yet in December, we were 56.6% of the job losses. In government jobs, where we make up 57.5% of the workforce, we represented 91.1% of the job losses. That is, almost all job losses in government jobs in December were for women. And these numbers are worse when you're looking at oppressed nationality women. In December, 9.1% of Latinas and 8.4% of Black women were unemployed, compared to 5.7% for white women and 5.8% for white men. Women aren't just losing their jobs, they're also being forced to make impossible choices for their safety, for their children who are at home because school is remote, against paying rent or groceries. And now you can see how capitalism works to distort women's roles in the way that women are concentrated in fields like healthcare and teaching, both fields that we've talked that have been in the news a ton because of because of how COVID has affected them. Women in healthcare are on the front lines of battling COVID-19, all the while being denied personal protective equipment, having to fight for vaccines, which are in short supply, and fighting a healthcare system that focuses on profit over people. Healthcare CEOs are putting up banners celebrating their frontline workers or calling their healthcare workers heroes, but that's not hazard pay. That's not personal protective equipment, and it's not any kind of assistance to make sure that their families are safe while they battle COVID-19 every day and see the effects that it's having. This pandemic has also pushed the US healthcare system past its limits, but this system was never going to be able to survive this. It was broken long before this pandemic. The pandemic has magnified deep-seated distrust and dramatically different healthcare outcomes for white Americans versus our Black, Latina, and Indigenous sisters and brothers. Forced sterilizations are not so distant in the not so distant past, and the lack of community healthcare in poorer communities means that there is never going to be success in fighting this pandemic. And that's because capitalism focuses on profit over people, over our communities and our health. For teachers, this pandemic has pitted the public necessity of schools to help get parents back to work as opposed to teachers as workers. While Trump and now Biden talk about prioritizing opening schools, they ignore the grave concerns that teachers have for the children that they teach, for those children's families, for their own families, and for their own health. But Women's Day wasn't born just out of acknowledging the way that capitalism and male supremacy keep women oppressed in our society. It was born out of struggle. Women in the garment and textile factories staged strikes in protest of low wages, long working hours, terrible working conditions, inadequate pay, inhuman, and the lack of the right to vote. They faced police beatings and jail when they protested. Yet women workers continued to struggle for better working conditions, better pay, better working conditions for many, many years. And many people have heard of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. In 1911, 146 young women died because of the working conditions in that factory in New York. Socialists were some of the leading fighters in these struggles in the US, just as they were in many other countries. And this inspired Clara Zetkin to propose International Women's Day at a communist, sorry, I'm losing my spot. Just a second, I'm ahead of myself. So Clara Zetkin, she proposed designating International Women's Day at an International Socialist Congress in Copenhagen in 1910. Women delegates from 17 countries unanimously concurred. We do have a long way to go. There's no doubt about that. But we have moved mountains over this past year. Protests of thousands during a pandemic, demanding justice for George Floyd and all lives stolen by police. The strike at the University of Illinois by healthcare workers demanding PPE and help for and ensuring their safety for their families. These are great examples of the ways that people have fought back over this past year, and they're exactly what we need to continue to do. We need to get out into the streets because we won't make gains sitting in our houses. Even if it's safer, we have to get into the streets to fight. On March 8th, Derek Chauvin, the cop who murdered George Floyd, will go on trial in Minneapolis. And we call on everyone here to join us in the streets fighting this and fighting for justice. In Freedom Road, we don't just fight in the streets, but we fight for socialism. We believe the only way to true liberation is to cast off this rotten capitalist system. And we can't settle for anything less than the full liberation of all women, including our trans and non-binary siblings. As Assata Shakur said, we have nothing to lose but our chains. We need to continue to fight and battle for a better world because it won't be handed to us. We need to struggle together. And I call on all of you to join us. You can see the link on the bottom. We need to get in the streets and we need to continue to fight. And I thank you all for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Tracy. You know, it's so important to highlight those connections. You know, like we fight for socialism because we fight for women's liberation and because we fight for Black liberation and all this. And what you said, the system was broken before the pandemic. I felt that, you know, so we know what we got to do. We have to keep going because, like you said, everything that we win through struggle. So thank you so much for highlighting those wins. And next, we are going to hear from Sol. So Sol is an awesome, proud Chicana, and I might add a recent mother who has been a public member of Freedom Road for over 10 years. She organizes for Chicano liberation in the neighborhood of Boyle Heights in Los Angeles, Azatlan. So over to you, Sol.
Thank you so much, Sid. And also thank you to Tracy for that awesome, awesome speech. Good afternoon, everyone, and comrades. Happy International Women's Day to all non-binary people and sisters and femmes. Some of us continue fighting for socialism, like myself, all while throwing blows at patriarchy and gender oppression. But what does this look like for a working class Chicana like me, and while organizing as a mother now in the Chicano nation of Aztlan? I started 2021 by giving birth to my very own daughter, meaning that in 2020, one of the most lethal years for Chicanas, especially pregnant ones because of COVID-19, I didn't stop organizing and fighting back despite being pregnant. In Aztlan, I have organized with and learned from countless women and non-binary people. August 29, 2020, I witnessed as queer siblings like Lucia Torres, one of my sisters from CSO Youth, waved their rainbow flag during their speech at the 50th anniversary of the 1970 Chicano moratorium. During this same event, I saw teachers like Lucia Torres introduce her United Teachers of Los Angeles, UTLA Union President Cicely Meyer Cruz, who is half Chicana, half African American, who then turned around and made an amazing, powerful speech. These are all women who I admire and who are organizing next to me. Since moving to Los Angeles, I've witnessed women leading every single struggle you can think of, from immigrant rights to police brutality. Women are breaking barriers and we are winning. While Trump led various attacks against women and especially Puerto Rican, Mexican, immigrant, and queer women, he's gone now. And in his place is Biden and VP Kamala Harris. In LA, many of us actually refer to Kamala as Cammy the cop. Kamala might correctly and positively identify us as Chicanos, and I have to admit, I was pretty proud that she gave a shout out to the Chicano moratorium last year. It's awesome. You know, it's the first time that a president or a VP has ever done this in history. But that doesn't mean that we have women's liberation or Chicano liberation now, just because Cammy the cop said, hey, you guys are Chicanos. We're still dying. And the LAPD and LA sheriffs have claimed the lives of over 500 victims in recent years since I've lived here. Those fighting to win their justice for more than anybody else are the mothers of these victims. These mothers speak the truth, they never hold anything back, and they never fear the labels that are thrown at them like weak, emotional, crazy, angry. Today, I think of Comrade Mao and his words regarding us holding half the sky. Half the sky can sometimes feel like it's a little bit too much given what we do and the amount of responsibility that we carry on our shoulders. I pieced together this speech between my baby and feeding her in the middle of the night. This society expects us as women to have the energy, the time, and the effort to survive anything they throw at us, and they still demand a smile from us. I'm proud to say that we can survive anything because, like steel, we are forged and made unbreakable through fire. Happy International Women's Day to you all. We are on the freedom road and quickly advancing the liberation struggle of women and non-binary people. Si se puede.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sol. That was great. And speaking on all the women and queer people that you fought alongside and were inspired by, I think that's so important to, see people in the movement who are sometimes left out in the writing of the history of these movements, not in our telling of the history, right? But it just makes such a big impact. If you can see it, you can be it, right? So I think that's really important. Awesome. And next, we're going to hear from Liz. So Liz has been organizing in Tampa, Florida for 7 years in the labor movement in Teamsters Local 79 and in the community as a member of the Tampa Bay Community Action Committee, fighting against police terror and for a civilian police accountability council. And Liz is also a member of the Freedom Road Socialist organization. So with that, over to you, Liz.
Hey, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Elizabeth. I go by Liz and I use she, her pronouns. As stated before, I'm a member of TBCAC, or the Tampa Bay Community Action Committee, as well as the Freedom Road Socialist organization. And I am so happy and honored to be on this program today to talk to you all about the fight for women's liberation, and specifically where trans women fit into that. And, I think it's interesting that we were just discussing, sorry about dogs in the background if you can hear that, but I think it's interesting that we're talking about, queers specifically, femmes and trans femme people specifically, and how we're often erased from history and often isolated. So though today there's a much more visible fight, there's a definite history of gender nonconforming people struggling against their oppression and repression by the state. Why do I use the language of gender nonconformity in this instance versus transgender? Because what we understand as transgender today didn't exist for a really long time. We didn't have a name. There wasn't a proper way of addressing us or understanding us. And instead, we were degenerates. And oftentimes, all we faced was prosecution for it. And I do mean prosecution, such as in the case of Mary Jones, who was a freed African-American. She was arrested in New York in 1836, in part for dressing as a woman. She did this in her daily life, and it was important to her. And she would go on to be arrested again in 1845 for the same reason. But defiance like that of Mary Jones was rarely recorded until the mid-1800s. And maybe you ask yourself, oh, well, why the mid-1800s? Well, let's think about it. What happened in the mid-1800s? This huge political upheaval, this intense economic battle between the industrialists and the slavers in the US North and the South. So during times of great political and economic change, there's a need by the ruling class to actually come down even harder on those that would go against their ideology or what they deem to be correct. And in the case of capitalism, we see that there is not just a want, but a necessity for the nuclear family to exist. You have to have your mama, you have to have your papa, you have to have your babies, and the mama stays in the kitchen and gets pregnant. And that's supposed to be like the dealio. But obviously that isn't the case. We've been hearing from amazing women in the work that they've been doing, and obviously that ain't it. So why would the state do this? Because it's convenient to target us. I guess that's the easiest way to say it. It's convenient to target us because we're often isolated from not only other people like us because of fear, but also because of larger communities that we may be a part of, such as in the case of Mary Jones, who was actually originally from New Orleans, but would end up moving to New York, and actually found more camaraderie alongside fellow prostitutes, which is also a very common occupation of trans women, than many other folks. So this kind of repression happens in waves. And so the next big wave that would actually happen would be during the time right after World War II, the Lavender Scare. It was a part of the Red Scare, right? This fear of communists, this fear of queers, this fear of the subversive. And so that was definitely a part of it. But prior to the Stonewall riots, which happened in 1969, many gender nonconforming people would actually be a huge part of, including Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. I don't want to say a huge part of, but they put their energy and time into fighting in the civil rights movement and fighting in the Black Power movement later. But in 1969, when the Stonewall riots happened, that was kind of a turning point where finally trans issues could become more center stage. And finally, you know, trans people would try and make our issues known to the larger movement. So that way we could have like a strong and profound struggle. And it seemed like it was going that way for a minute in the gay rights movement. However, we would soon be isolated from that movement as well, because in some way we are undesirable because people are not immune to the ideology of the ruling class, of the bourgeoisie, right? If they don't want us to live our best lives, well, you know, we're gonna boot you out because we're a little more likable than you are, maybe. Let's phrase it that way. So they were largely shunned from these movements, and actually Sylvia Rivera and other trans femmes, including Marsha P. Johnson, would go on to form STAR, or the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. Now, this was an important group because it was composed of mainly young, homeless, queer people. And, you know, many of these people were booted from their families and they had to find a family. And so STAR was able to not only combine, or rather be involved in political action that made a real difference, but also to combine that with a housing project in a way to get young trans people to live a little bit more of a fulfilling life. So though that organization was incredibly important and was, you know, very widely known, later on, it would unfortunately dissolve because it was so isolated and because of intense attacks by the state. Now, there would be a reconnection between the larger gay rights movement and the more trans-specific currents in the 1980s and early 90s during the height of the AIDS epidemic, through combined actions and joining with ACT UP. This led to many more victories than if, you know, trans people were specifically left alone to fight the AIDS epidemic. But as many of you know, the struggle for trans rights continues today. Shit, why wouldn't it? What don't we need? We need legal recognition, including the ability to easily change our names and gender markers, to get economic benefits from marriage to our spouses, which is still up in the air. The ability to change our passports without us being forced to get gender affirmation surgery or sex reassignment surgery, which that's mutilation if you are forced to do that in order to change a legal document. Fair legal representation in court without our gender being used as a weapon against us, particularly in the case of custody battles, among many others. An excellent example of organizing today that addresses some of these needs is the Real Name Campaign New Orleans, where folks pressured the civil district court to drop name change fees from, and let me tell you, this stuff is expensive, $506 to change your name. Many trans people don't have access to those kinds of economic resources because we aren't hired, or because we're fired, or because we're this or that, or we're in low-paying jobs, extremely low-paying jobs. So $506, that's like taking a leg. But they managed to get the fees dropped from $506 to $250 in mid-August of 2020, which was an incredible win. According to the organizers, the Corps only did this because they lost 2 business days when campaign supporters crammed their phone lines. Our needs expand to reproductive rights as well, as reproductive rights should include any health care necessary for someone to live their day-to-day life, not just in the process of making and having babies. This includes access to hormone replacement therapy, access to gender affirmation surgery if we want it, access to mental health facilities and other help if we need it. And this becomes particularly important as young trans people are prone to suicide because they are isolated from their families and from their immediate community in many cases. I guess I'll just speak to my personal experience a little bit in the labor movement and in TBCAC. And actually, I think it's important to note that I've never gone anywhere by staying to myself, or by being afraid to go out, or by fearing what other people might think of me in these movements. The only way that I've seen that we can fully understand each other, me and my coworkers, or me and community members, is when we're in the fight together, is whenever we're struggling together. Whenever the pandemic first started up in 2020, folks in the warehouse, we actually got together and we had a protest outside. And some of these people had never recognized me, never spoke to me, didn't give me the time of day because I'm not their cup of tea, which is fine. But whenever we came together in that struggle, that's whenever recognition happened. That's whenever we understood that our fight is not with each other, but with the enemy, with the bourgeoisie, with the ruling class, those who would keep all of us down. Women's liberation means trans liberation, means our fights are one and the same and are immeasurably stronger as one. The history of our isolation has kept us in a weakened position for too long, and it is necessary for us to not only fight for our own lives and rights, but in the greater people's movements, in the fight against monopoly capitalism in this country. It's only when we're combined that the greatest of successes can be reached, such as in the gay rights movement and during the AIDS epidemic, such as when we were a part of the civil rights and Black Power movements. It's only through our struggle that we finally got a name and are no longer recognized solely as degenerates or medical nightmares. We're trans women, we're women, and we are beginning to be recognized as such. It is only through unity and struggle that we can end our greatest enemies, the monopoly capitalists, the ruling class, and live fulfilled and dignified lives. I want to end this with a quote from Tony, a member of the Real Name campaign, NOLA. If you don't see us, if you don't hear us, you best believe you're going to fear us. Thank you all so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Liz. Talking about safety through solidarity, I think that's so important. Like, we're not safe by hiding away. We're safer when we come out to fight together. We defend each other in the fight, and we defend the fight. And some of the history that you spoke on, it also brought up for me how in the fight against police crimes, we see how the police actually enforce and carry out patriarchal violence and gender-based violence, right? And that's direct violence of police using their position and impunity to get away with abuses, specifically against Black women. But it's also a systemic violence in that it can be useless or even harmful to go to the police in issues of sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking, and harassment if you are a woman, transgender. So because of these experiences and in standing up to demand justice for the lives taken by police, Black women and queer people have really taken up leadership of the fight for justice and the fight against police crimes all around the country. And we saw that nationally. I'm sure people saw that in their cities where, Black women and queer people were leading thousands of people in the streets day after day, and also taking up the work of organizing, forming coalitions to deal with the structural issues in policing through the fight for community control of the police, through legislation like CPAC, and campaigns to defund the bloated police budgets as well. So, you know, like the history of transgender activism, it's the special oppression in these circumstances that actually end up being the spark for people to wage a struggle against it and fight for their liberation and across all these issues. So yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much for that. And our last speaker of the day will be Shireen. Sorry for the pause there. Last but certainly not least, Shireen. So Shireen is president of the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees Local 3800, the Union of Clerical Workers at the University of Minnesota. She's been a labor activist for 17 years and helped lead a 3-week strike of 3,000 workers demanding better wages and more respect on the job. So put some respect on her name. Shireen's been organizing for working class internationalism for over 30 years. And with that, I will pass it on to you.
Thanks so much. And this is really just an amazing opportunity to be on this panel with such incredible fighters for the working class. Happy International Workers' Day, everybody. Happy International Working Women's Day. It's an incredible thing to be here celebrating with all of you. This last year has been really freaking hard. And it's been hardest for working women. I'll just say it's been hard for everybody, but especially for working class women. We've seen over 523,000 deaths in the U.S. due to COVID. Each one of those is a person that was loved by someone else. Each one of those represents families that have been devastated and families that have been grieving, most of them not being able to even grieve together in a really hard time. On top of that, though, we've seen incredible crisis on the job and incredible crisis of job loss. Tracy talked about some of the statistics, but I'm just going to share again some of them. So since the pandemic started, we have seen 9.6 million jobs lost in the US. 55% of those, or 5.4 million, are jobs that were lost by women. And the jobs that were lost the most, 80% of them are low-wage workers. So we know that these are these jobs that were lost were by people who had no savings, who had no safety net, who were scrambling to survive day to day, struggling to make ends meet, to feed their kids, living in poverty already, and then lose their job on top of it. And that's been devastating. 40% of people who are out of work have reported being out of work for more than 6 months. And that creates a real crisis. Women's employment in particular, women's employment is 20% below what it was just a year ago. Compare that to 9% for men. I saw some write-up that called it a she session, which just makes me think of that She Shed ad, which is really problematic. But it really is, the economic crisis is hitting women. It's hitting them hardest. And this was something that I saw that was really especially devastating. Women accounted for all of the job losses in December of 2020. 156,000 jobs were lost by women. All of the job losses reported were by women. Men actually made headway and more men entered the workforce than left it. So that's one part of the crisis, right? A report on Minnesota says that 65% of women in Minnesota work in sectors that are most impacted by the closure. They're most likely to lose jobs. So when the pandemic, when the numbers were going up again and things were shutting down, women were losing their jobs. And that's why we saw those numbers for December. And we have to remember that when you lose your job in the United States, it means that you're losing your health care too. If you had the possibility of having health insurance, it was provided through your employer, right? And so that means that all of these people who have lost their job in a pandemic have lost their health insurance as well. And this is absolutely criminal. So we see this as part of the crisis, right? The second part of the crisis is a health and safety crisis. So, and when we look at it in terms of a gendered analysis, we have to recognize that the high-risk jobs are held by women. Again, a report on Minnesota jobs said that 60% of high-risk essential jobs that are held by women, compared to 78% of low risk essential jobs, which are held by men, right? So most people are actually still working, right? And are considered essential. But the reality is that some jobs are at greater risk because they have higher exposure to COVID in the workplace. And those jobs are primarily held by women. They are jobs that are in nursing and the healthcare industry as a whole. So healthcare workers, those working in food service and restaurants, those working in grocery stores, those working in the hospitality industry. These high-risk jobs are jobs that are held by women. And there is a crisis that has been created, that has been manufactured, that women are not safe. We also see that there's a real crisis that exists at home, right? Women are carrying out the unpaid labor in the home that takes care of their families, makes sure that everything is running at home. And the crisis of children not being in schools means that there's a crisis at home as women are raising their children and trying to educate them, in addition to the teachers who are struggling so valiantly to make sure that the teaching is going on online, right? So this isn't a diss on teachers at all. This is just to say that all of that additional work that's being done is being done by women in the household in far larger portion than that by men. I saw numbers that said 1 in 4 women who have left the workforce have done so because of lack of childcare, right? So it's that is a real issue where they have no options other than that. 70% of people reported that 70% of parents of young children reported that they've seen cuts in hours or closures of their childcare, right? And this is in a system that's already messed up. It costs $16,000 a year to put an infant in childcare in Minnesota, which means that it is more expensive than putting a kid in college at a top tier 4-year university, right? So we see that. We also see that there's a real crisis in the home because women folks are unable to leave situations of violence because there's nowhere to go. And so they're stuck at home in the pandemic in situations of violence. And because there's so many low-wage workers, what it means is if you don't have a living wage, you're deciding between whether or not it's safer to live on the streets or whether or not it's safer to live in an abusive situation and what you're going to do with your children, right? Those are real decisions that working people make every single day and that have just gotten so much worse because of the pandemic. And what we've seen in terms of the impact for Black and brown women in particular, we know that Black and brown families are far more likely to live in multi-generational households. Black women are twice as likely as other women to have had a loved one die from COVID. Right. And they're also just there's an issue of living in fear every day that you are going to be at work in order to make the money to feed your family. And then you're going to come home and put your family members at risk and that you may be potentially causing death. Right. That is a crisis. That is a crisis of the system, not to mention the fact that you're fearful of bringing COVID into your family. You're also fearful of what the police are going to do. So it's a daily crisis of worrying about whether or not your family will make it home safe. Right. So someone said that the system is broken. The system actually isn't broken. The system is working exactly the way it was designed to work. It is working. It is a drive for profits, the push to reopen, because if we aren't working, they're not making money. The U.S. Capitalist system was built on stolen land with slave labor from stolen people. The system is working the way it should for those who profit. How it's not working is for working people. It has never and will never work for the working class. And so what do we see for women? Women are sick and tired, right? But we are not giving up, but we are rising up. It was mentioned women hold up half the sky. I think we hold up a hell of a lot more than that in the economy, in our homes, and in the movement, right? We have seen people rising up, movements rising up in the past year in incredible numbers, and that's been led by women, whether it's the movement for Black Lives demanding police accountability, whether it's nurses and healthcare workers, whether it's teachers, whether it's the SEIU Local 73 workers at UIC who went on strike demanding respect us, protect us, and pay us. That was led by women, and Black and brown women in particular. Whether it was Hennepin County workers who demanded in one time to be able to mourn and grieve in the aftermath of George Floyd's death. They got paid time off to do so because they demanded it and fought for it. Whether it's King County workers in Seattle who organized and won $9 million in emergency childcare. Those things happened because women rose up and demanded it. So again, it's been a hard year. We're sick and tired, but women are not giving up. They're rising up. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Shireen. You know, that was an important correction intervention you made there. The system is working how it should for those who profit, but it can never work for us. That's absolutely right. And thank you for highlighting the crisis in all the different spheres of life that sometimes we don't give the space that they need to deal with them, right? So thank you so much for that. Now, after we've heard from these awesome panelists, we're gonna go into a question and answer. So the first question, give me 1 second. All right, so this is a good one. No, I'm not gonna do that one right now. I'm gonna do a different one. Hold on. All right, what are some mistakes to avoid when organizing? What are some mistakes that you've come up in your work that you've had to correct and deal with? Let's pass that question to Liz. Liz, I see your finger up. What do you think about that? Can you deal with that?
Yeah, I think we can make a lot of mistakes when organizing, right? And that can come in such a variety of ways, but I think that ultimately what it comes down to, the real root of it is not meeting people where they're at, not being willing to see people where they're at and being able to address those issues when they need to be addressed. Now, I was speaking a little bit about isolating, and trans people, I guess in particular, you know, didn't necessarily do all of that like themselves, right? Some of that was from outside forces. Some of that was us not being able to integrate as well. But, excuse me, there's another part of that, which is a fear-based isolation. So we can go inward and we can want our own groups and we can try to shut ourselves off from other struggles. And that's one way where we're not meeting people where they're at, right? How do we expect people to understand us and want to fight for us if we are not willing to fight for them and what they need at that time, in that moment? Excuse me, I need some water. But the other way that we're not meeting people where they're at is if we're trying to push too far. It isn't helpful for me. I mentioned some of my experiences at UPS, and I'll tell you, when I first started working there, it was a real struggle to get certain people to recognize and use my name and pronouns. And so what was the way not to address that situation? The way not to address that situation is to go, oh my God, you are the worst. I don't like you. This is tragic, you know, whatever. I'm gonna go and do my own thing and you are just not worth it. That's not the way to do it. The way to do it is rather to be like, okay, you know what? This person doesn't care for me because I'm trans, but this person right now has this issue and I have that issue. And we should, because we both have that issue, we can work to correct whatever it is. And so I think, you know, there are a lot of mistakes to avoid, and maybe this is a little overly general, but I really think it comes down to meeting people where they're at. Be willing to accept that you're not a perfect person, they're not a perfect person, we don't have perfect ideas, and we gotta do it together if we want to do it at all.
Yeah, that's a great answer. A lot of it, you know, reminded me of how do we deal with that question of unity, but also not just ignoring those contradictions when they come up? And that's also a really important part of the work within the Black liberation movement, right? But the reason that we work to overcome the contradictions that come out of those unique oppressions faced by Black women and transgender and queer people is because we recognize the importance of unity. So we struggle against those unique oppressions in order to be able to continue to fight together for equal rights, political power for Black people. So that approach to unity is what ensures that we are all moving forward. But yeah, I thought that was a great response. All right, next question. Let's do this one. All right, this is juicy. So as socialists, what do we have to do to combat patriarchy and gender-based oppression? What does that look like for us? What do we do? Let's see. How about you, Sol?
Thank you so much, Sid. So this is a good question, right? I think there's a number of us who consider ourselves socialists, right? I myself consider myself a revolutionary socialist. So I believe in the overthrow of the rich and the dictatorship of the proletariat, right? The working class, revolutionary people like myself and like those of us who are on this panel now, right? Trans women, non-binary, etc. And so, we have this huge task of trying to combat patriarchy and gender oppression. Are we going to do that under capitalism or its highest stage being imperialism? The short answer is no, right? Because under imperialism, they're going to hand us scraps. They're going to throw something at us that looks good, feels good, makes us think, oh, look, we're okay being oppressed, right? They might tell us, look, Hillary Clinton is your abuelita, Sol, your Chicana. Look, she's your grandma. And that just is not going to fly, right? What that looks like in East LA is you're going to get Chicanas, working class Chicanas coming out to protest her to kick her out of East Los, which is what happened when she was trying to run for president. I do have to say that was a really cool moment, by the way. I think that, when you overthrow imperialism, when you finally, make the rich buckle down to their knees, that's when you're going to be able to really, really make gains against patriarchy and gender oppression. These are factors that exist under socialism, and those are massive gains that are done when there is socialism. We can look at Cuba, we can look at places like Venezuela that are on their way to socialism. We can look at the People's Democratic Republic of North Korea, or the DPRK, and we can look at a lot of these other socialist societies that have existed in the past, like the Soviet Union. And, for 1910 to legalize abortion, that's something that would have never happened if there wasn't, a massive gain that was done under socialism, like what happened in the Soviet Union. Argentina just recently passed that last year. These are societies that do not have, socialism, and you can't get this kind of advance and this growth and these combatings of patriarchy and gender oppression under imperialism. It's impossible. So I think that's the one way that we can do it. But also, because we don't have that yet, I think what we can do is having studies. We can definitely try to do events like what we're doing now, where Liz can show us what it means to be a trans ally, and also, what it means to be working class and what it looks like for us under the working class and under COVID-19. 1 in 4 women leaving the workplace because they don't have childcare at home now that their children are learning at home. That's something that we need to make sure we spread and are knowledgeable, because how are we going to expect women to come out and join the fight if they're busy at home taking care of their children?
Awesome. Yeah. This fight for women's liberation, we know that it's tied up with the fight against monopoly capitalism, and you can't separate it, right? And that's what sets our work apart from bourgeois feminism also, that wants to continue your exploitation, but make it pink, right? So yeah, awesome. All right, so next question, let's do, what are the biggest barriers that you see to women's liberation? That's kind of a deep one. Let's deal with that. Shireen, you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, I was going to say it's deep, but it's easy. It's capitalism, right? I think that there are a lot of people who think that that women's liberation will come led by white bougie women in corporate America, right? Like they're the ones that are going to lead the way, and suddenly we'll all be free and life will be good. And that it's just I think again the past year has shown what an utter fallacy that is, and how capitalism is set up to destroy all of the gains that have been made. Just the past year has set working women back, and corporate women back too, I've got to say, but working women back at least 25 years in terms of economic progress. And this stuff is cumulative, right? Because it's like each year that you're out of the workforce, that means it's money that you don't gain that year, but each year after that, you're behind. Right. And so for me, women's liberation will not come in advance of working class liberation as a whole. But I also think it's important to note that we can't just say, oh, let's wait for the revolution to come and then women will be liberated, right? Like this is a two-part, like a struggle that we have to be involved in from beginning to end, and we have to fight now for women's rights, for women's equality. But we also have to fight to transform this system, because it's never going to provide full equality. It's never going to provide liberation for women. And so we need a total transformation of society.
True. So true. So true. Awesome. Okay. Here's a question. What are some of the contradictions that you have faced in your area of organizing, and how did you handle them? How did you overcome them? Let's see, Tracy, you wanna deal with that? You started us off strong. Come back and tell us what you think about that.
I mean, I can give some of the examples that I've run into in anti-war and climate organizing. Especially the anti-war movement, imperialism, and talking about war. There's a lot of men who have a lot of experience, who have a lot of opinions. And it's definitely something that can be a lot of talking heads. One of the things that we've done really well in the anti-war committee is really lift up women's leadership, right? And make sure that we are part of bringing women to the front of every protest, right? As much as we can, having women play a leading role in all different levels, from tactical leadership to leading the protest and emceeing and speaking at it. I think that what it takes is being conscious of what public face you're putting forward, and how you're ensuring that women are able to be encouraged and lift up in leadership roles. And it's something that I think is really good for all of us to keep in mind, including in Freedom Road. We work really hard to make sure that women's leadership is lifted up, and women are given a place to speak and to be leaders and to learn and be leaders in all of our movements.
Yeah, for sure. It's an intentional way to move to combat some of that. So that's awesome. All right, so there was a lot of awesome questions in the chat. I'm gonna lift some of these up for our panelists to deal with. So let's see here. Okay, this is a good one. What are your favorite pieces of theory or analysis written by communist or socialist women? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I appreciate this question a lot, because I think that it's an opportunity for us to actually showcase other revolutionary women, right? Or socialists. So I have some suggestions. There's a sister whose name is Gloria Anzaldua, and I know that's a difficult name, so I'm going to actually link. She was a proud queer feminist, and also she considered herself a socialist. And there's an excerpt from a really cool book that she wrote, and it's called How to Tame a Wild Tongue. And in it, she talked about our Chicano language of Calo, spelled C-A-L-O, not like Frida Kahlo. And in it, she talked about how, like as women, people always told us to basically bite our tongue, but also they want to control our tongue, right? I'm not going to go super in depth into it, but also they want to correct our calo, our Chicano language, by telling us that it's not proper Spanish or that it's not English. It's because it's our own language, right? And so she goes into awesome detail and explains what is calo. And I think it's a wonderful piece. It's completely about women's liberation because it's, you know, it's a body part of ours, literally our tongue. And yet you have women in society and imperialism trying to control it. It's an awesome piece. And I also would recommend Bethita Elizabeth Martinez. She's not a revolutionary, I would say, or, you know, maybe she doesn't consider herself one, but she does do revolutionary things by writing a book called 500 Years of Chicana Women's History. It's one of my favorite books. I just recently rebought it because I gave it away to someone and I was like, no, I kind of want it back. And it's basically two books in one because each page is translated into English and Spanish. And it goes into 500 years of Chicana women from before colonization to current. And it is an amazing piece. I actually bought it at one of the Students for a Democratic Society conferences, and I was just like in awe. I probably should have left it for a young student, but I was like, you know what, this one is mine. I'm taking it with me. And so I really recommend it because it goes into, you know, the working class struggle, which is something that I think lacks in a lot of academia, is that they don't really want to mention like the working class plight. If you're not academic, maybe they don't want to highlight your struggle. I don't know why, maybe because they're not revolutionary, but I would definitely recommend those two. And I will link them. And I think they'll be provided in the chat. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Anybody else want to speak to that? Go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, I just wanted to add two works that kind of like immediately came to mind. One being, it's called Liberated Women 2, like Roman numerals 2. And it's by Maria Lorena Barros and from the Communist Party of the Philippines. It's a pretty short work, but I think it's really important. And I go back to it all the time because it kind of lays out, like in Filipino society, these are some of the conditions for men, these are some of the conditions for women. What is like the common factor that like oppresses both men and women? It's like imperialism. And in the end, what is the ultimate difference between men and women when our fights are so one and the same against monopoly capitalism? And it highlights the importance of that. So I wanted to recommend that one. And then the other one I just wanted to recommend for some trans history, if you would like, is Leslie Feinberg's Transgender Warriors, Making History from Joan of Arc to Dennis Rodman. So if y'all are interested, you should check it out.
Awesome, awesome. I'd like to add one to that list, which is a text from Asada Shakur. It's called Women in Prison, How It Is With Us. If you haven't read it, definitely read it, especially if you're organizing against police crimes, against the prison industrial complex and the unique oppressions that are faced by women. It's just like, if you've never read her writing also, it's very powerful. She's a proud socialist fighter, spent more time on the FBI most wanted list than like a serial killer. So that's how you know that they really tried to get her, right? So yeah, I'd like to add that one to the list. Okay, moving right along, we have some more awesome questions in the chat. Let's see how many we can deal with. Okay. I keep saying deal with like it's like a burden. It's not a burden. How many we can joyfully answer. Okay. Let's see. Okay, here. What role and tasks do men have in supporting women in the movement? Okay. Shireen, you want to take that one?
Yeah. So I kind of the short, snippy answer is get out the way. Going a little bit deeper than that, I think, I've had a privilege of really being in a lot of organizations that have been run by women, that have been led by women. And I've also had the privilege of working side by side with men who have supported that and recognized it, and created space, not in the way of saying we're going to give you this little area to work on, or we own this, but we're gonna turn some of it over, but instead to say, to recognize that their liberation is tied up in women's liberation as well. And women make up more than 50% of the world population, and the working class, and we can't have working class liberation if we don't have women's liberation. And so I think some of it is really just a question of recognizing women's leadership. It's also a question of kind of checking yourself and thinking about, am I taking credit for the work that women do? Am I just repeating things that women have said, but claiming it as my own? Some of those things we see a lot that goes on. I also think it's important to do a lot of the work that women do to run organizations and make sure that everything's happening. Like, we do that work within organizations, we do that work in the household as well. And I think that that there needs to be equal partnerships that's there. So not just looking at like, we'll do the sexy work and do the speaking and things like that, and and have all of the base building work done by women. That's got to be done by everybody. So those would be some of the things I would say.
Yeah, for sure on all of that. There's also a question that's kind of related to that one, but it says, how do we properly combat male chauvinism in the workplace and in our movements? So Shireen, you already kind of dealt with that. Liz touched on that, highlighting the primary role of struggle, but what does that mean in practice? Anybody else want to? What do y'all think about that? Oh, go ahead, Tracy.
I'll just add, kind of some practical things. It's having men be in charge of the cleanup. It's always a great day when that happens, where women can be part of leading a meeting and not have to do the cleanup afterwards, in addition to whatever leadership role, where women don't always have to be the one who are kind of watching who's speaking more, and women we always, and I do this a lot. I tend to, I'm sorry to interrupt. I get it, but men around don't mind interrupting. They have no problem feeling like their opinion is really valid and should be added at every point. And, I'm hoping that people are getting it, and I think it's getting better in some ways, but it'd be nice if men could stop and think, did I answer every single question that was asked in this discussion? Should I step back? And I think that that's really true in the workplace, where men need to think about, how can I play a logistical role and not just a leadership role? Like, how can I make sure that I am cleaning up after my lunch, or, not just leaving the microwave dirty. Not that my coworkers do that at all. I work in a very male dominated workplace, and it'd be great if men would start thinking in some of those roles. Those are just some practical ones. But I do think that in workplaces with unions, this is something that's a lot easier to combat, because you're organized and you have a structure to have more power in the workplace.
Yeah. Shireen, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I think, a friend of mine who is the president of his union local and has been a chief steward has an incredible zero tolerance policy towards sexual harassment and discrimination and male chauvinism in the workplace. And he will take on his male coworkers and directly say, you got to stop this shit, or I will march you down to the boss to quit. right? And so I think that the union members a lot of times, and union stewards in particular, think that our job is to defend every worker for all of their actions, right? And I think that there are some actions and things that are intolerable, and that we need to make that clear. We are about, as a union leader, I'm about lifting people up in the workplace, not protecting folks that are behaving in ways that are unacceptable. And so I think that we just have to make that clear and say, you need to change your ways, or we're going to be part of making sure that you get out of here, right? Like, yes, there's due process, but again, why would some jerk ass male coworker or fellow union member have more rights than women workers, right? And so you're making a decision. If you say, we're going to defend this, or we're not going to challenge this behavior, what you're saying is we don't care about women workers because they can be mistreated that way, and we're just going to tolerate it. And that's not what we should be building as a union movement. And so I think it's about being real clear, and about doing education too. It's not just about saying, well, kick them out, but it's about kind of changing and educating about why, like those things divide us as workers, and it won't benefit anyone except the boss. And so we need to change that in order to better all of our conditions.
Yeah, 100%. I think that speaks to the question too about, the unity and the contradictions, and the balance between that, right? So, okay, this one is an interesting question. All right, how do you think that socialism will change these problems that affect women that you all have spoken about? Okay, all we need to do is socialism. How's that gonna help? All right, Tracy, you're unmuted.
Yeah, I love this question. It's aspirational, and I think that that's something we can all use right now, is thinking about where we can go. And some of the things that I think about a lot are things like universal childcare that's affordable, or free childcare workers that are treated with respect, teachers that are treated with respect, healthcare workers that work in an environment that prioritizes people and not how much money it costs to actually provide care. Or the communities, thinking about healthcare in communities, and how that will, just thinking about how that would change our lives if we felt like we could get the care we need when we need it and not worry about the cost. Like, that would touch everybody's life in this country right now so dramatically that, I don't know why we aren't rising up for socialism right now, but maybe we could plan it when we're done with this discussion. The other thing is, there's no reason that this country should be allowing such grave difference of pay, right? Like, that's something in a planned society that we could eliminate, right? That we could make sure that people are getting what they deserve, and we can make sure that people also have housing. Like, all that's something that touches in particular on especially gender nonconforming and trans lives right now, right? Like, unstable housing is so bad for our country, and it's in a pandemic, it's disastrous. And so things like that can be eliminated under socialism and under a planned economy. And I really hope that these are just a couple things that came to my mind, and I was like, oh, I'm so excited to think that, like, we could actually achieve these things and make a better world and really touch people's lives. And that's one of the things that's so exciting about being in a socialist organization. When we're fighting for it, we have big aspirations that we can achieve.
Yep. Nothing to say, just awesome. Yep. Okay, all right. Let's do one more question. I think this is a beautiful question. We'll put this up for any of the panelists, anybody to answer, but can you tell us a favorite example of yours of women's leadership and women's liberation that you've seen in the mass movements? So just go off mute as you see fit. Go ahead, Sol.
Thank you, Comrade Sid. I love to refer to this person a lot. I did it in the speech I gave earlier, and I also did it earlier today with the Central Community Service Organization International Women's Day event. This person's name is Lucia Torres. they're non-gender conforming, and they're queer, and they're pansexual, and they're amazing. They're also 18 years old. They just turned 18, and they are amazing. And they approached CSO in the summer of last year, right after George Floyd was killed. And they, along with other femmes who were in high school, said, we want to make a solidarity event as Chicanas, and we want it to be in East LA, and we wanted to show solidarity with African Americans. George Floyd, there's a lot of racism that is still existing under Chicanismo. We have to challenge that. We have to challenge the way that we behave. And so they did this amazing event, right? And it was all these like teeny boppers, right? And they're so amazing. Like, and to this day, like Lucia earlier today, was like, the Spanish word is regañándonos, which means scolding. She was scolding all of us, right? We were on the same side, but she was still kind of like throwing some stuff at us and telling us that we all should challenge ourselves, which is like phenomenal work, right? Lucia constantly makes sure that we understand that if you're cis, if you're presenting yourself as a particular type of gender, you're still falling under the trap. And I love the way that Lucia constantly challenges anybody, no matter what age you are. If you're 75 years old, she's going to come for you. If you're 12 years old, she's going to come for you. And I think that tenacity is really what we need in order to overcome these barriers and to organize really, really fervent people who are completely anti this climax of, you know, what Trump had done to us, and made it totally normal to, you know, say awful things about grabbing women's parts and, you know, not even batting an eyelid and being nominated as president, right? So I think that she's a perfect example. They are a perfect example of what we need to have, you know, being in leadership. And also there's other women around CSO who currently and have always been doing work. Another example is Lucia Torres. She's a teacher. She's a proud single mother. She's been a single mother forever, and her daughter just recently graduated from an all-women's college over in California, Northern California. And, you know, she's always been an example of what it's like to be a single mother. And I don't know how she gets everything done. Now that I'm a mother, I'm always talking to her and asking her, how do you do this, right? But she's a perfect example. And I would say that, you know, no matter what working class struggle she's waging at work with teachers' rights, she's ready to throw it down in the community. And I think that women like her, you know, there's many of them around, and we just have to find them and make sure that we put them in leadership positions, that we take a step back. As Tracy was saying, if you're dominating a space, men, I hope that you learn that you don't have to, because we got it.
Yes. Tracy?
Well, I think probably an easy one, but also should never go without saying, is Rosmia Oda. You know, she was a leader in the Arab women's struggle in Chicago. She had like an amazing organization, you know, in the AAAN, the Arab American, oh, damn it, I can't remember the whole acronym. It's AAAN, but they, and we're going to have a link in there. It looks like she organized Arab women to learn English, and just like had this amazing community developed, and then was under attack by the US government and still stood strong, right? She was still just had amazing strength and grace, and just, yeah, she's super badass. And every time I saw her or heard her speak, it always just made my jaw drop thinking about what she's gone through. And yet she was still always at the front of every struggle. Yeah.
100%. Anybody else? Liz, you want to speak to that? Okay, we'll do Liz and then Shireen.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to give a shout out to and definitely recognize Taylor Cook from Tampa Bay SDS and the struggle that's going on in Tampa Bay SDS right now. I was actually arrested alongside her on USF campus. I was there representing TBCAC while they were fighting for free speech on campus. And under the what am I looking for? The pressure, the ominous shadow of HB1, which is an anti-protest bill and would strip Floridians of their ability to effectively have protests, and would also legalize people hitting us with cars, that's like a real problem. And so I want to recognize that sister. We got arrested together, and despite being like arrested, she is still fucking kicking. And that struggle continues on today. So definitely Taylor, and check out Tampa Bay SDS. They do great work. But I'll also add, as a quick aside, I want to recognize all of the femmes that are in the Real Name campaign, NOLA, because I mentioned them before. Please check them out. But the work that they're doing is so important for trans people, so very important. Like, I think a lot of people don't recognize that. Maybe some people don't recognize how often like your name is used and how much that affects like your day-to-day life. So I think the work that they're doing is incredible, and shout out to all of those friends and comrades over there in New Orleans.
Awesome. And Shireen, you want to have the last word on that?
Yeah, I was also going to say Resmea Oda, who I think gives an example of what it is to devote your entire life to the struggle and to never lose sight of that. But Tracy covered that, and so I think there are two that are groups, really. The Chicago Teachers Union is such an incredible kick-ass union of led by women, and mostly women. Their president is a guy, but most of their most visible leaders are women, and Black and brown women in particular, and they've transformed the way people view the labor movement right now, and the support that they have for their communities and the support that they have from their communities is because they see that it is not just that being in a union isn't just about fighting for the narrow demands that we have in the workplace, but instead it is about fighting for the demands of the working class as a whole, and making the connections about how do my working conditions affect students' learning conditions? How does it affect the families and communities that we live in? And I think it's made people really in the labor movement think differently for the first time in years about how we should be organizing. And so I just think they do incredible work and should be lifted up always.
Definitely. Thank you guys for that. Yeah, I think, like I mentioned earlier, during this, at least for me, during the uprising in Dallas this past summer, we saw some of the largest protests in years, just thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the streets. And it was Black and Latino women and queer people who were underlining that work, not only leading, but keeping people safe, doing security, making plans, all of that. And then out of that intense energy, we saw the transformation of that energy into a long-term fight to combat prisons and police. So, we saw some real mass organizing work to create a coalition, a united front that has never existed in Dallas before. And it was Black women who led that charge, right? So yeah, thank you all for that. Those are some great questions. I think we got all the ones that we could get. We're gonna go ahead and wrap it up here today, but thank you to everybody who tuned in here to watch. The truth is that the stronger the role of women in the people's struggle, the stronger our movement is as a whole. I think that we made that very clear. Our panelists made that very clear today. So we're all about building this fight to continue and grow. So thank you also to all of our panelists, not just for your words and your insights for us today, but also for your ongoing work in the people's struggle. So hopefully, if you hadn't already joined the struggle for socialism, our panelists have given you some inspiration to get involved and keep fighting, and the resources of where to go, how to join, get more information, that's all going to be right down below. Also, somebody mentioned in the theory recommendation, Assata Shakur's autobiography, that too, can we get the links for that also? But yes, follow all those links down there to plug in and get involved. I also want to encourage everybody to follow Fight Back News, news and views from the people's struggle. Read it every day. There's always some some juicy bits, some gems of information on there, okay? So check it out, Fight Back News. And definitely also check out the International Women's Day editorial on Fight Back News as well. It's an awesome read. So thank you, everybody. We're gonna leave it at that for an incredible program. Thank you. And you know, all power to the
people.
To the people. All right. Good night, everybody.
Hasta luego. Bye.